Welcome to Escapists Anonymous, the fantasy fiction book club. I'm Dan.
And I'm Sam.
And in this episode, we're continuing our discussion of The Foxglove King by Hannah Whitten. We'll be deep diving into chapters 14 to 28. So prepare for politics, mystery, romance, and spoilers as we explore what trouble Lore and the boys have been getting into.
So, welcome back. We're going to pick up from chapter 14 onwards. It's been an exciting few chapters to read, Dan, wouldn't you say?
The story has really progressed.
Yeah, if I'm honest, I was enjoying the first third of the book, but as people probably heard, I had some reservations. But I must say, this middle section has really picked up. I'm a lot more interested. So we're going to dive into some of our thoughts about this section of the book. Now, for those of you who are joining in, please go back and listen to at least the previous episode, because we covered the first third of this book there, and you might find yourself a bit lost. But if you just want to jump right in, go ahead. Be our guest. Spoilers ahoy. So let's cover the events of chapters 14 to 28. Suspecting he knows the truth about Lore, Bastian strong-arms her and Gabe into accompanying him to an underground fighting ring. And in exchange, he will let them into the vaults so that Lore can sever the connection with the young boy who she was communicating with in the previous section. In doing so, Bastian exposes the truth about Lore by using someone from her past, and now he's made her and Gabe into double agents working for him against his father and uncle. Then there's a Mortem leak in the city. Lore accompanies the press game more to deal with it. She channels an enormous amount of Mortem, neutralizing the threat, but it places her in a coma for a week, and it's only Bastian's mysterious magic that enables her to reawaken. After she's recovered, Lore and Gabe hit the books in the church library. They're trying to find out references to spiritum, the use of elemental magic, and they're trying to figure out what August and Anton might know themselves, who've been doing their own research. And they're trying to find out how this can all relate to the channeling of Mortem. Bastian finds him in the library, and he reveals that he has just discovered King August is dying, and that Anton and the King have been researching transubstantiation. At the end of this section of the book, it is revealed that Ali's father, Lord Bellegarde, is secretly placing notes around the citadel that relate to the numbers of people who are dying in those mysterious village wipeouts. Think that covers everything, Dan?
I think you've pretty much covered it. I mean, a lot happened, so...
There's a lot.
We probably have to be picking up on other smaller, maybe seemingly less important elements of the story that may actually turn out to be highly important later on.
We haven't even covered the croquet matches, the tea parties.
The huge amount of religious theory discussion.
So much religious theory. I do enjoy that part of it, if I'm really honest. I enjoy the fact that they're like going, well, of course, the tracks in this other language would mean something completely different. It's an element of it that I feel like Hannah Whitten's really taken time with. You know, I don't know if she's got a research background or something, but she clearly enjoys the discussion of theological kind of like disagreements.
Yeah, some of those back and forths seem to act like flirting or foreplay.
Yeah.
where there's kind of minor disagreements or just a kind of struggle to break down some of Gabe's more, strongly held religious views.
Yeah, I feel like the way that this book is doing the romance, there's the scene where she moves from her bed to the sofa to be in the same room as where Gabe's sleeping, and there's that lovely romantic kind of tension building, and then the next night she goes and lies with him on his mattress on the floor, and there's no sex actually going on, but the tension that's building.
Yeah.
My. But at the moment, I feel in this section of the book, Bastian's in the ascendancy, Gabe's on his way down. Despite the kind of romantic that was much more tangible with Gabe, but Lore's having her doubts about Gabe.
Well, I think he's displaying some chauvinistic traits. Mm-hmm. There's a bit where they're having a little bit of an argument, Lore and Gabe this is, and she brings Bastian into it, and he says that classic, he's only saying this to try and get into your pants. It's like a classic male to female put down when you want to discredit something they're saying, and it really put me off Gabe.
Well, and because he's so wedded to the religion and the teachings, the way that the current religious tracts teach it, and the things that Gabe adheres to, is that the men are up here, the women are down here. The buried watch stay beneath, and they tend to Nixara in the darkness, and the men are in power and control in the light.
Yeah.
But then what I think's interesting with this is the fact that Mortem can be channeled by the women, and that gives them some kind of power, which he interprets as twisted, which is a very medieval Catholic approach to women. You know, any kind of woman who attains power is immediately like, oh, but they're doing it behind the throne.
Witch.
Yeah, or some kind of healer who would immediately just be labeled a witch. But when Bastian is the one who's possibly channeling Spiritum, he's like, no. No, not Bastian. Definitely not Bastian. I mean, like, you know, it could be any other member of the Arsenal line. Of course, you know, the whole family, but not Bastian. No.
Yeah, there is a bit of a contradiction there, isn't there, in his absolute belief in what's taught and his seeming dislike of the system, Bastian, you know, the disparity between rich and poor that actually is written into the scripture.
Yeah. I mean, one of the opening chapters even opens with a quote that's like, anyone who tries to rise above their station is going against the gods. I can't remember it exactly, but that's the gist of what it says. So, you know, how does Gabe frame that with Lore, someone who was born underground and has now risen to being like infiltrating the aristocracy? Is he also secretly hoping, oh, well, she'll just go back to being a commoner?
Yeah, except he doesn't know that Lore was born underground.
Oh,
so Bastian knows,
yeah.
But she doesn't feel confident in telling Gabe this. So Gabe is still working on the assumption that she had an accident when she was younger, and that's how she gained her powers. And yeah, it says a lot about where Lore's instincts are telling her to place her trust.
Here's another thing about Gabe and his presence in this book. So they are approaching the Mortem leak, the big one, the one that puts Lore into her coma. She feels that some nauseousness, this kind of queasiness, like she's going to faint. No one else notices this. No one else is clearly feeling this sensation. And she looks at Gabe's face and it goes blurry, and she phrases something along the lines of, like, he's about to morph into something else. And she specifically says only Gabe looked blurry, nothing else. Now, what's the deal with that?
Yeah, and there keeps being these references to Gabe and these sensations that she gets when either she's round him or like that type of situation.
I've got a bit suspicious of Gabe now, because there's that point where she's in the coma and she's visited by a more shadowy figure. So there's definitely the Bastian presence at some point. But there's also like the shadow figure sits beside her and says stuff when she's in the coma, and she looks up and all she sees is blue. And Hannah Whitten keeps referencing the fact that Gabe's eye is so blue.
So I'm just going to say that on the audiobook, the narrator uses the Gabe voice for that person.
Well, okay, well okay, go on.
So actually, like, one of my instances where she's had these sensations when Gabe's around is based on that. And actually, it didn't say that it was Gabe who was in the room talking, but it says she senses fire, incense, tightly held rage, and trees burning.
Yeah.
Are those good things or bad things?
Yeah.
Tightly held rage doesn't sound great, but it sounds like something that Gabe could feel as someone whose father was brutally murdered, and his kind of whole life was ripped out from him as a child.
But there's also some stuff like his involvement isn't entirely clear in all of that, because yes, we know he was there when it happened to his father, but I feel like they were kind of being fobbed off a little bit where, he's hated at court because the 10-year-old Gabe didn't fill out the correct paperwork to divorce Ali, properly to end the engagement. And it makes me wonder, like, is Gabe Gabe? Like, is Gabe something else? Is he something more and he hasn't realized it? Or is he not really Gabe Remo? I'm just so suspicious about where it's taking it, because if, like, she's seeing beyond this veil, beyond this mask, is he something to do with Mortem?
Do you think he could be Jax and he's replaced Gabe? So he's a
That
Carithian.
would be huge. That would be a huge revelation.
I mean, it's a long game to play, isn't it? And supposedly Jax is actually the king over in Carinthia.
Yeah, he's busy ruling. But it does just make me think that there's going to be some kind of reveal where Gabe isn't all he says he is. Because when they're running off to the vaults in the middle of the night, Lord Belgard is there dropping off one of those notes, right? Who's he dropping off to in this other area of the castle? Because over in this far off tower, there's no way that if he's dropping the note for the king that would be for him. So I'm just so curious.
I have to say, the whole leaving the note thing, I was left thinking, I hope we get an explanation as to why there's notes. Otherwise, it's a really clumsily obvious way to link this person to this crime. So yeah, fingers crossed there's going to be some explanation to the notes, because leaving it pinned behind tapestry or something like that, it's pretty random, given that he had a conversation with the king the very next moment where what he said out loud was pretty incriminating.
So if it's for someone else, is he working for Bastian? Because these almost feel like what they call like cold drops, or like when you have a secret agent just leaves the thing behind, just a drop off. And there's some kind of resistance movement against the king or against the church? Because at the tea party, Lore asks Ali, "Oh, does your father hate the church?" And she's like, "Oh, he hates everything."
Yeah.
But of course, he'd previously in the conversation with Lore talked about, like, you need to come and attend this thing. It's very important religiously, yada, yada, yada. And so Ali seems to know that he probably wasn't religious. So is he just doing that as a front? And she knows that he's against all the stuff of the church. So he's working against it for some reason. Is he going to turn out to be a bit of an unknown ally?
Yeah, and when Bastian comes in, just where we've read up to, he knows that it's 75 people in the village, doesn't he? So how does he know that any more than anybody?
Spread that quickly?
So has he picked up the note from behind the tapestry
but he knows the significance of the note, so he knows what it just means, the bodies, and of course Lore's piecing it together independently.
Yeah.
But with the voice in Lore's head, so not the one that's the smoky Gabe, is that connected with the one that she hears in her head when she's in the coma, when she takes in that weird arcane black knot that Anton's making?
Yeah,
because it says stuff like, this isn't something you can escape. Haven't you figured that out by now? And it mentions that her ascension's drawing near. She is the heir to death, daughter of the dark, the rebirth, the wildfire that allows new things to grow. And she is a womb for their magic that they can't make. And it's knowing so much, it can't help but be a supernatural kind of more omniscient force than any of the people that we've met so far in the book.
Yeah. And again, coming back to the different experience of listening to the audiobook from reading the book, they give that the same voice that she has when she's channeling. So you get this sense that it is one voice and it's coming to her in these different moments.
So this is the voice of Nyxara or the Night Witch?
So at that moment, I started wondering, because we've had these people who have thought they were Nyxara reborn.
Yeah.
And we know now that Lore was born in very close proximity to Nyxara's tomb.
Do we even know if that's real, though? Do we even know if that's true? She was so light on detail about her mother. Oh, she was a merchant's daughter who fled to the catacombs. And that's it. That's all she mentions about her mother. We don't know if she's alive or dead, anything. How do we know that Nyxara didn't birth Lore out and they just were like, well, we need to come up with a backstory because no one's going to believe this?
Well, I hadn't thought of that. I mean, she could just be the only child that's been born in that close proximity to the source of Mortem, and therefore it's given her this link to Nixara.
Because we're seeing a shift from it being these characters thrown together through necessity and chaos. We need you to spy on my son because you have the right magic for this, and you're also a spy. And suddenly we're having all of that replaced with destiny. There's loads of destiny going around at the moment. You know, she was the one who was born. It just so happens that she's asked into the Citadel as she's approaching her 24th birthday. This all suggests that they've been watching her for ages, right? That they've had this plan, because there's no coincidences necessarily going on here. But when she sucks in the stuff, and Anton is also going like, what the hell? So he isn't fully aware of what her full power is. So if he's been following her this whole time and it's all orchestrated, why is he so surprised?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily get that he was massively surprised by it.
Oh, okay.
I think it wasn't necessarily clear what his reaction was. He was fixated on her when she was channeling, and he was also doing something very strange with the Mortem. He was altering it. He was sort of pulling it into a sort of ball of weaved Mortem, and then Lore channeled all of that Mortem. And so there was a question mark for me there as to whether Anton has done something to the Mortem that has caused Lore to have that experience of it, and then it's left her in this terrible condition. Because there's a moment just before they head off to deal with the leak where Anton's acting very suspiciously about her coming along.
I think that weird spiky knot was intentional, wasn't it? And it makes me wonder about, he's also reading about necromancers. Him and August are looking at necromancers, and they say that they used to have pairs of necromancers, one to channel the Mortem, the other to issue the commands. Is the stuff that he's been researching about necromancers tied in with that weird knot? Is that what he's threaded into Lore? Is that something that's going to come up with that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I hadn't linked that to what happened with dealing with the leak. But yeah, I was working on a bit of a suspicion that Anton, whether he was trying to harm Lore or just trying to test her to see actually what her capabilities are, that's what I was kind of oscillating between. So the other thing, just while we're on that dealing with the leak, was I don't know whether it was just me, but I thought that the rest of the Prescamore were really pathetic.
Yeah.
Like their powers are almost useless.
Yeah. They couldn't handle it. They took loads of them. Like, it was clear that some of them were probably going to die at that point because it was such a huge leak. So you know how in the previous episode I was saying I didn't really get Mortem and I didn't get the mechanics of it. I think I understand it a lot better now. And the reason why I felt that way in the first third of the book was because that's how it's kind of seen in the world. Like, the Prescamore are not impressive people when it comes to channeling Mortem. We're learning about how there were necromancers. There were people being like, let's experiment, do everything we possibly can with Mortem. Let's see what it's capable of. And then the church just cracked down on all of it.
Yeah.
So there's potential there in Mortem. Lore and Gabe even kind of view it as like what they do, what the Prescamore do is a bit underwhelming, because all it is just firefighting. It's just like, oh crap, it's all flowing out. Let's push it into some flowers.
Yeah.
When you see what Anton's doing, it's on a whole nother level. And it's clear there's lost secret knowledge that only he is privy to.
Yeah. I think I was just a bit disappointed that at least Gabe wouldn't have had a little bit more power or ability. I guess actually what we also learn is that these Mortem leaks happen like once in a generation. So it's not the type of thing that any of them would have actually had to deal with before.
Yeah. And really the Prescamore, they are guards of this power. They're not necessarily expert users of this power. They're there to channel it back into the ground, nullify it, remove it. So like, you're right, it is a shame that Gabe can't do anything more impressive, even though he is so dedicated, but he's also a very passive participant within it. Like, he follows Anton, he follows the rules, because he's trying to atone supposedly for whatever happened when his father capitulated to Jax.
Yeah, maybe it's a longer game for everyone. I think, like you were saying, there is knowledge out there that possibly Anton is accessing that eventually maybe Lore and Gabe may come to understand and be able to utilize, and that might unlock new directions and new uses of it.
Yeah. I just want to jump to one other tunnel thing with the use of Mortem, and that is when they visit the stone garden. And you've got all of these flowers and bushes and trees kept in this suspended animation. I thought that was at least one little interesting element they use. And I wonder if that mechanic of we can put in suspended animation will be something that they'll utilize at some point. Will someone be so injured they need to cover them in stone until they can heal or something like that? Like, it's almost a kind of more medicinal purpose for it. But there's a real kind of Reformation vibe building. Like, you've got this overly raw, excessively powerful church, and there's a reckoning coming. They've suppressed the knowledge, and you've got a figure like Bastian, and it's really good. We learn more about his politics. Like, he understands he has to assume power even though he doesn't want it, because there's no one else who is in line to have it who he thinks would be any good or responsible with wielding this power. And it's like a burden he's having to bear, but he also wants to try and have a bit of fun while, before he takes the throne.
We've only really met, other than Anton, 2 press game more, Gabe and Malcolm. And Malcolm, he's not like a true believer.
No.
He's certainly lost faith in Anton and the king. Gabe, obviously, he's annoyingly faithful to Anton. But even in that, he's allowing himself to be pulled into the camp of, we need to make sure that Anton and the king don't find out about this. So there's a real erosion of trust among the people supposedly most faithful to at least Anton, if not that whole system.
It makes me wonder if there's going to come a point at the end of the novel when Bastian and Lore are like, this is it, this is the time, the power has awoken, Gabe, will you join us? And he has to make this choice. And it could be kind of cool if he went, no, I side with Anton, or Anton's dead, and he's like, no, I will assume power over the church. I cannot condone what you're doing.
Becomes the priest exalted.
Yeah.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I don't know if it's going to happen because the whole romance triangle going on. But
he's pretty vehemently anti the real systemic injustices that whole system propagates. But you could also have a thing where that type of scenario does happen, and he believes that using the existing structures is the best way to instigate change, and then maybe Bastian believes that you have to have like wholesale revolutionary overhaul. I mean, it could go in any number of different directions.
Yeah, and that's why I'm enjoying this book so much more. That the possibilities have really opened up. I felt like I knew where this book was going, and there's still some elements of it that have remained on that track, but there's so much more that's been thrown in here. Especially to do with understanding the Mortem a bit better, the various schemes, the fact that Lore is this unreliable narrator with her own history. I don't trust the characters enough to now think it's guaranteed that I know where it's going, because we could have more revelations. And so I found myself getting so much more invested as I was reading along. And I'm really glad that it's gone this way, that I'm a bit more uncertain. I have so many questions, but they're good questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, given that we know that Bastian has this effect on Mortem channelers, both Gabe and Lore couldn't channel Mortem when he was in the room with them. He was in the room, and it was the effect of him touching her that drove out the darkness and enabled her to wake up from her sort of semi-comatose state. We're also now having the religious theoretical discussion in the library around whether the chosen was plural or singular in terms of Apollonius handing the power of spiritum to the Arsinoe line, or was it just to a singular Arsino somewhere down the line. And we're getting these hints that could be Bastian. So my question is, do you think he's aware of all of the power that he may have?
Maybe he's reluctant to believe in it because he's so against the church. But it's one of those things with these fantasy books, because, you know, there is literally a dead god beneath their city that leaks out death magic. And he's so dismissive of, you know, oh, well, it doesn't even mean anything. Don't even worry about it. It's nonsense. But it could be. And again, they're being quite flippant with the information being handed out. Like the street fight, and his hands start glowing gold. And then Lore's learned all this stuff about the sun in his hand. And like she can't channel Mortem around him. And then when the gold glow goes away, she's like, oh, must have just been a trick of the light. It's like, piece it together. Come on, what are you doing?
Or at least go back to that moment. Because I think a lot of that stuff she's realised since then. But it's like, okay, couldn't channel Mortem in his presence. His presence drove out the darkness of Mortem. And oh yeah, just thinking back, he had those glowing hands when he was in that back alley fight after the boxing match.
And of course, August and Anton both go, so did anything weird happen while you were out there? And she's like, no. And I know that she didn't want to tell him anyway, but you now can see that they are clearly expecting something to have happened. You saw something that possibly happened. Piece it together, Lore.
Yeah. She hasn't mentioned that to Gabe, has she?
No, she's not mentioned that to anybody.
And you would think, because they are together, they're exploring this idea about Bastian and Spiritomb and what that might look like in practice. I would have at least gone, oh yeah, and there was the glowing fists. My sense with Bastian is he's aware that he has some powers, but I think it feels like he doesn't know that he has this effect in terms of preventing them from channeling Mortem.
Yeah, when they're piecing it together and they're saying that stuff, they're going like, you need to leave so we can channel Mortem. I wonder if he's read some ancient text in Anton or August's office where it mentions an individual who would start displaying Spiritomb, but he's in denial about it being him. He's like, I've got enough going on in my life. I need to fight off my dad who wants to try and frame me for being a traitor. You know, he's more focused on the temporal politics of it rather than the theological side of it. That he doesn't really want to acknowledge that could also be his destiny.
Yeah.
This is one of the pros of having it from a single individual's perspective. Everyone's motivations aren't unknown to us. You know, we're only getting it from what Lore's picked up. And Lore is not the most helpful of protagonists when it comes to this, because she's a bit self-centered. She's really in denial about a lot of what's going on. So she's not really engaging with the pieces that I'm reading going, follow that, follow this.
Yeah. That's why you got to keep going, because eventually she's got to piece all this together. And I guess Bastian probably has to as well. But if we're going to get into the villages, obviously they do go back for Lore to sever the connection with the child. But when they go back, she has another go at asking what happened. And he says he was killed by the night, and that obviously that she needs to ask the others or awake the others or something like that, implying that the other bodies hadn't been burned, basically, I think was the other thing. But I was killed by the night. It kind of flummoxed me a little bit. That was not what I was expecting to to hear.
Yeah, is it tied in with this smoky figure who has Gabe's voice? Is it because they're all black, they're a shadow? So is it a child's perspective of that? Is it the fact that when someone absorbs Spiritomb from someone, it just goes completely black? Because you know how when she's channeling Mortem, she goes completely white. So is there something in that?
But I guess the other bit of information we've had about the villages is the conversation that Lore overhears between Lord Belgard and the king, where Lord Belgard tells him that the next group is set to be processed by this evening. And the king asks him about the bindings, which Lord Belgard says seem to be in order, but they won't know until the king tries.
Yeah.
So there's all this kind of suggestive language, bindings, the king has to try in order to know whether it will work.
So I can't remember who mentions it in the library scene, but if the king is worried about dying, if he is like trying to absorb the life or something, he's using them to extend his life, as the story seems to be suggesting, then we have this element of necromancy. Because is the thing that Anton was channeling, that spiky knot, is that one of the bindings? Is that what we're seeing being used on the bodies?
Yeah.
Because of course there was that really annoying bit again where Lore isn't putting 2 and 2 together to make 4. She's at the tea party. The young woman Danny, she's saying, "Oh well, I'm dating this wealthy young merchant, and he's earning so much money in transporting some mysterious goods from the docks, and they're paying so well. Whoever's doing it is paying them to not ask questions and just deliver lots and lots and lots of boxes somewhere, no questions asked."
Yeah. There's all these clues, aren't there? It's like, it's only 2 nights' work a month and it pays incredibly well.
So we've been having all these theories thrown out there. What do you think is the underlying big plot? Is it all leading towards Bastian and Lore? Is it more going to be that's going to be part that starts building for the future novels, because we know this is part of a trilogy? Is this main arc going to be just about the villages, and it's going to be about what August and Anton are doing? What do you think is going to be the big reveal in the third act? Because I feel like there's so much going on here. Resolving all of them isn't going to work. There'll be too much.
Yeah. So we haven't even really touched on the fact that we're now reasonably sure, or I am, I don't know about you, that Bastian isn't working on behalf of Carithia as a spy.
Oh, yeah.
So that's been established. So, yeah, in answer to your question, I think I'm leaning towards this eventual moment of Bastian and Lore becoming kind of king and queen with the balanced magic that they both seem to possess, and that this is the key to controlling the powers that exist within the world. And maybe the future books might contain more of a sort of external threat from Carithia that they have to address, and that actually, like we discussed in the previous episode, maybe there are some other elemental magics that are not available to people in Del Air and may become a threat in the future, and that they have to then sort of figure out how to deal with.
Yeah, I wonder as well, with them being a couple, does this tie back to the original mythology? If we're talking about them being ascended humans, the original gods, do you think there was a big fight between all the gods? You know, we had this god's fall, and Nyxara and Apollonius were a couple then, and they fought off the other gods, and then one betrayed the other. Will we see another arc of this where eventually, if Lore / Nyxara has to decide if she's going to repeat history and betray Bastian, or whether it'll be an upending of that, a breaking of the cycle, and they'll stay true to one another, and there'll be a greater peace at the end of the trilogy?
Yeah, I did actually have that thought when Gabe and Lore were sort of arguing about whether Nyxara had to be the twisted evil goddess just because her power was the power of death. And Apollonius is supposed to be missing. Apollonius never, to the knowledge of the scriptures, he's not necessarily dead. And I wonder whether there's something to come back to there, because supposedly Nyxara attacked Apollonius and tried to kill him.
Yeah.
And then she ended up being killed instead. I wonder whether we might find out that that's not necessarily what happened, but the victors get to write the history books.
Yeah, so either none of the gods are dead, they're all just sleeping or wounded, and they're kind of like in this restful state while they heal, and now they're all healed and they're waking up again, because they were saying, oh, the gods only leak their power once they're dead. Well, if they're about to awaken again, then that wasn't the case. Unless, you know, it's when they say awaken, they mean Lore, Bastian, they're awakening in the new forms of it. But if Bastian can now control Spiritum, that could mean Apollonius is dead.
Yeah.
Because that's how you get it, if it's based on that theory. But I think it's kind of being left very intentionally ambiguous, so that we're going to have this revelation of, oh, there's a new generation of magic users that are coming back in, or whether we suddenly see these gods just like pull themselves up out of the ground, like burst out of the city, burst out of wherever they fell.
Yeah, or whether the fact that the actual use of these magics has been so suppressed has actually prevented these gods from being active or conscious or whatever. And actually, if you have this set of circumstances where the king and queen are these two incredibly powerful channelers and have the balance and stuff, that could unlock something.
But I think the point we're at, we've hit some major revelations with all the major plot strands at the moment. We're heading into the final third of the book, and I feel like there's just so much that I'm looking forward to being answered when we get on to reading this final third. Hopefully, Lore's going to kiss someone, most importantly. Because that's what we're here for. We want to see who she's going to kiss. Don't tell me we have to wait until the second book for that.
There's multiple horny moments from Lore in some pretty inappropriate situations, I would say. In particular, where she's realised that the little boy that she brought back from the dead might still be alive, and she forces Gabe to rush down to the vaults to try and sever that connection. And as they're leaving the room in a panic, he hasn't quite pulled his shirt all the way down. And I think there's a phrase about a distracting amount of abdomen on show.
Yeah.
And it's like, Jesus, Lord, get your head out of the gutter for 1 minute. One more very, very strange thing that I just wanted to ask you, whether I was just in full-on over-analytical mode when twice in a short period of time they kept mentioning apartments being deep cleaned, and I was like, is there something suspicious going on with the cleaners in the Citadel? Like, should I be paying this much attention to the phrase deep cleaned?
I really feel like that was an administrative way for her to explain. Bastian wanted to get them out of the flat, and so it's just like, of course we have this group of cleaners who go around deep cleaning like it's an NHS ward.
Yeah.
The one weird thing that I picked up on, so in the last episode everyone was wearing tulle.
Yeah.
We almost cut it off at the perfect point. No more tulle. In this point, it's only chiffon. So, like, everyone suddenly changed what they're wearing. There's loads of mentions of chiffon. So I'm looking forward to finding out in the final third what everyone's wearing then.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm starting to work on the assumption that whilst the king thinks that he has Lore spying on Bastian, I think the king would also have someone spying on Lore, spying on Bastian. He obviously knew that they went to the boxing.
Is it Gabe?
Oh, I didn't even consider that. Don't do that to us, Gabe.
Because he's wrapped around Anton's finger.
He's annoyingly wrapped around Anton's finger. Every time they're having an important discussion, he's like, we should go to Anton. You can tell people's patience just wearing thinner and thinner.
Enough with Anton! Actually, one final thing. And I know we keep saying this, but there's just so much to discuss. Anton and August at some point are going to betray each other. I can't help but feel they've actually got their own little agendas. And while they're working hand in hand for so much of it, there's going to come a point where it's going to be the choice between church or state, and they're going to bounce off each other, and that'll be their downfall because they'll be working against each other.
Oh, which could be a precursor to Church Gabe versus State Bastian in the future.
Who knows? Who knows? But still, very exciting. I can't wait to do the final third of this book in 2 weeks' time.
Indeed. So, all that's left to do is read from chapter 29 all the way through to the end, the epilogue, and that's what we'll be discussing in the next episode in 2 weeks' time. If you want to join in the conversation, if you want to make sure that you're up to date with all the theories, all of the drama and intrigue, make sure you're following us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, you name it. We're on there. It will be at Escapists Anonymous Pod. So follow us and let us know what you think of the show, what you think of our thoughts and ideas. We strongly encourage you to be brutally honest. with what you think of us. Tell us if you think that we're just a couple of clowns who should keep our opinions to ourselves. We'll ignore you, but we'll appreciate you paying attention nonetheless. So, all that's left to do is say we'll see you next time for Escapists Anonymous. Goodbye.
Goodbye.